Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Baker, and this is Claire Chandler. Welcome back to another episode of Creating the New Normal, Leading in a Post-Pandemic World. It's a mouthful, but I think it's important. You know what? We're in a new normal. We are absolutely in a new normal, and we need to talk about it. We need to know about how we are going to survive and how we're going to thrive as leaders, as businesses, as people going forward, because this is not going to last forever. This is not the first crisis the world has been in. We've been in many crises before. We're going to be in lots of crises moving forward. It's the companies that understand how to move forward through this and understand how to build the best practices to be able to put themselves in a position to succeed that are going to. So last week, Claire, you ended off talking about vulnerability. And I think that that's a great place to start. So why don't you give a little bit of a recap about what we talked about last week, and let's go from there.
Sure. So we talked a lot about, this notion that of this globally shared experience, this COVID-19, this pandemic that everyone is trying to figure out a way through and come out whole. And one of the things that we talked about was the importance of business leaders to make the right turn at that fork in the road between showing hubris and showing vulnerability. And what we mean by that is, leaders to have so much pressure from the outside and so much pressure from the voices in their own head that they have to have all the answers, that they have to have all the solutions, whether there's a crisis or whether it's smooth sailing. And in a global pandemic like we are going through right now, no one has all the answers, because none of us have ever been through something exactly like this.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the reality. We are all learning as we go, and we are adapting as we go. At least the businesses and the leaders who are truly, open to kind of learning as they go. And learning, to me, is a key component as well. Right? It's the companies, the businesses, but specifically the leaders who both learn and lean through this. And I'll go a little bit deeper on that. So learning through this crisis, how to do the job more efficiently. We talked last week about, doing the necessary things to keep the lights on, the bills paid, your employees paid, etc. But also learning as you go, what does this mean for the future of our company? Not for the now, for the future of our company. What have we gone without because we had to shift to remote work?
Mm-hmm.
We had to limit travel. We had to downsize group interactions. Are there any of those things that we truly sacrificed by making those shifts? And learning from that and saying, when we get through this crisis, and let me end the suspense for you, we will get through this crisis,
Mm-hmm.
right? But at the end of it, is any truly forward-thinking business going to revert to business as usual? And if you are, I think that's a huge mistake, but I think it's completely unrealistic to think any business is going to not learn from this and just go back to business as usual. First of all, it's not going to be so easy to flip that switch backwards. So there's that learning component.
It's that genie back in the bottle. It just doesn't go in that easily.
Absolutely. Absolutely. She's got a big full skirt that does not go back in the bottle the way it popped out, right? So there's that learning component. And the leaning component comes back to this vulnerability that we spoke of. Vulnerability is not the same as weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And too many leaders hear that word and they say, if I show vulnerability, my people will think I'm weak. The reality is completely opposite. If you show vulnerability, you show that you are human, you invite compassion, you actually foster the collaboration you have so desperately been demanding for decades, right? And you draw from that equity that you have been building up as a leader in your community. Your internal community being your workplace culture, and your external community being the clients and the customers that you serve.
Well, it comes down to establishing trust and building trust. And there's two different things. Is the problem with most leaders is being a leader in any way, shape, or form is a lonely thing. It can be extremely lonely because you feel like, who can I talk to? Who can I confide in? Who's going to understand what I'm going through? I mean, most business owners, unless you work with your spouse, it's very difficult to have conversations with your spouse about, a lot of different things because there isn't the context, or, or employees or whatever, because there's certain conversations you just can't have. But it's really important for those conversations to build a cadre of like-minded people. I was on a call yesterday, and the conversation I had says we have to build CEO forums. We need to build leaders forums. We need to build manager forums where people can talk amongst themselves about the issues that they're having and say, I'm scared. I don't know which way to go. I just laid off 500 people. Where do we go from here? Because guarantee you there's going to be somewhere within that group of 5, 8, 10 people that either has gone through a similar situation or has gone through something, something, or knows somebody that's gone through a situation and knows a way out of the hole. I mean, the joke is two people are at the bottom of a deep, dark hole, and they have no idea where to go out. And all of a sudden, somebody from up top starts pouring water down in the hole. And they say, what are you doing? He says, I'm getting you out. He says, what are you doing? You're pouring water, and you're pouring more and more water down the hole. What are you doing? And all of a sudden, the water rises them up to the top of the hole. And I think that's a great lesson to sit there and say, there's people that have a different viewpoint than you do. There's people that have different experience than you do. People that have different thought, processes than you do. And the more we can lean on each other, and it doesn't just have to be other leaders. It's also leaning on the people within your company. There's people within your company, and I don't care who they are, have brilliant ideas about how to move forward. They see things that you don't see. They're talking to customers that you're not talking to. They're talking to vendors that you're not talking to. They're looking at processes, or they're looking at data that you're not looking at. And the more you can talk about it and sit there and say, who's got some ideas? Let's just, campfire this. Let's sit there and throw some things against the wall and say, no idea is a dumb idea. And let's talk to each other and come up with different ideas and be open to that and sit there and say, you know what? I, as a leader, don't have to have every single answer to every single problem. I'm going to lean on the people that I know, like, and trust to be able to help work through this, because together we're so much stronger. Together we have a far better view of what the current scenario is and what the future lies. And I think that's where we need to be looking.
Absolutely. And it's amazing what happens when a leader, a true leader, acknowledges that he or she does not have all the answers. And what better excuse than a global crisis that is unprecedented in any time in history versus, our lifetimes now, to admit that you don't have all the answers, because there's not one person on the planet that has all of this figured out. So if you've been waiting for an excuse finally to admit that you don't have all the answers, meet COVID-19, right? So, and something amazing does happen when you sit with employees who are, to your point then, closer to the processes, closer to the customers, closer to the data, closer to the real world problems and opportunities that exist within your company. And you go to them and you say, what would make your job simpler, easier, more effective, safer, what have you? When you have that granular of a conversation, you would be amazed at the feedback that you get. Oh, yeah. Because people stopped, when it was, again, when we were riding this wave of prosperity, and there was little that you could do as a leader to screw that up. Leaders stopped asking their employees for suggestions on efficiencies and effectiveness and innovation. And what happened was workers stopped being as effective, stopped being as efficient, and certainly didn't raise their hand and say, I've got this amazing idea this breakthrough innovation that is going to vault our business into the next stratosphere. And so, again, part of why we have started this series of conversations is to say, how can leaders look through this crisis, not overlook it,
Yeah.
through this crisis and say, how can we leverage what we have, who we are, why we exist, to get through this crisis as a stronger, more unified, more competitive, and more sustainably successful business. And it's through leaning and it's through learning.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you talked about the fact that over the last number of years, leaders have just assumed and they've moved forward, and that has led to record amounts of disengagement. I think it's Inc. magazine that says that 70% of employees are disengaged at work. Forbes says that 50% of people were out there looking for work, and all these stats are pre-COVID-19. So take it for where it is, and that this was costing the U.S. economy about $500 billion a year. That every employee that you lost cost you $100,000 to replace. So when you're thinking about that, if you were listening to your people, if you understand them, and if you value them, and the key word is listening, understand, and value.
Yeah.
If we can do that, it's amazing the things we're going to learn about our own company that we had no insight for, because everybody's been dashboarding everything. Everybody says, okay, the managers create a report that goes up to the director, that goes up to the VP, that goes up to the senior VP, that goes up to goes up to the C-suite. Well, every single way along the way, that thing has been whitewashed. And so by the time the information gets to the CEO's desk, the CFO's desk, whoever's desk, it's a sanitized version of what the people that are actually seeing the issue actually said. If we can bypass that and get back to a point where we're actually listening to our people and giving them the voice and allowing them to say things unfiltered, and say, hey, look, we have a problem here. If we don't pay attention to this, we're going to be in trouble. And a lot of people are afraid to put that information forward as managers because, they don't want to speak truth to power. But whatever, if we don't do that, if we don't sit there and really have a true pulse of what's going on in our company, and our people have a far better pulse of what's going on in our company than we do, then we're going to lose insight, and we're going to lose the ability to act and react and be able to move ourselves forward. So I'm with you. We need to go back to have that internal communication and actually talk to each other and stop dashboarding and stop assuming that analytics are absolute truth. Analytics are important. Data is important, but data interpreted and communicated and understood is what we need. And that comes through effective communication, both internally and externally.
And boy, that journey you just took us through, from employee suggestion at the ground level all the way to the top, to the ultimate decision maker, was exhausting, and so true to life, right? Because think about how diluted and inefficient that process has traditionally been.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're in crisis mode. We don't have as many people on the ground or hierarchically as we did even a month ago because of the world in which we are operating currently. Think about how much more efficient businesses could be if they go straight to that worker who is closest to the issue, the challenge, the opportunity, and say, what do you need to make this better? They tell you what they need. You decide on the spot, yes, go and run with it. And like that, you've implemented an innovation, a simpler process, a cheaper process, therefore, right? The simpler, the fewer steps it has to touch, less money it's going to cost you, the less time, et cetera. Just the simplification that a crisis of this magnitude forces companies to go through is such a lesson for leaders who are paying attention.
Yeah. And empowering those people to make decisions.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the problem is that too many companies, especially as the companies get larger and larger and larger, We've lost the ability to empower our people to make decisions, to help our customers, to support our vendors, to make decisions that are going to impact a local, group or small team of people. They can't even make a decision of something that's going to impact just their team because it's got to be run up the food chain.
Yeah,
That's a problem. That leads to so much inefficiency, so much bureaucracy, so much lag time that it frustrates not only the people inside the company, and therefore, you're right, they just don't care anymore.
yeah,
If frustrated employees just stop caring. The phrase I use is your brand is only as strong as your unhappiest employee on their worst day.
absolutely right.
So if your employees are unhappy in aggregate, what does that do to your brand? What does that do? How do your customers, how do your vendors, how does the world see you? How do they engage with you? If all of a sudden, every single time they're reached with an employee that just knows how to say no,
Right.
and
And
just follows this linear line without any interpretation whatsoever.
absolutely. And if in good times, right, that wave of prosperity we keep referring to, there is a significant percentage of your workforce who is disengaged, who doesn't care, who has stopped innovating, who has stopped going above and beyond, does just enough not to get fired. As the old quote goes. Think about now you're in times of crisis, and what happens is those same people and those around them are so distracted by and concerned about this pandemic that what else gets sacrificed? Well, safety takes a huge hit. And I don't care if you are an office-based business or you are primarily out in the field working around dangerous equipment. Safety gets sacrificed when people take their eye off the ball. And people take their eye off the ball if they are worried about anything beyond their job.
Mm-hmm.
And you used such a key word earlier. You said empower. When we simplify the decision-making process and we empower people to make those decisions down the line, especially in times of crisis, when there is so much beyond our control. And leaders are anxious, leaders feel like, well, because I don't have all the answers, I'm feeling some anxiety as well. When you go farther down that hierarchy, think about your people who have little to no control over how COVID-19 will impact their family, how the decisions of the leaders up the chain will impact their job, if they're going to have a job either during the crisis or after, because the decisions of the leaders that don't take their own opinions and feelings and contributions into account may in fact bury the business. So
True.
now not only am I furloughed, but now I'm completely out of a job in the future. If you give them some empowerment, and the core of that being power, to make decisions that will improve the job that they do and the contribution that they make, you've given them back some measure of control that the pandemic has taken away from them.
I love it, and that's a great place to stop. Let's put a pin in that and come back at this next week, because there's so much in this conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that this is something that we're going to do week after week. And every fourth Friday of the month, or every last Friday of the month, we haven't figured this out yet, we're going to sit down and we're going to have a Q&A section where people can actually come in live and actually have a conversation with us. This has been Ben Baker and Claire Chandler. Thank you for joining us another week on Creating the New Normal, Leading in a Post-Pandemic World. Thanks for being part of this.
See you next week, guys.